Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Thursday. We're hanging out with Larry Johnson. Larry's website is sonar21.com. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Thursday afternoon. We're hanging out with Larry Johnson. Larry, welcome back.
Well, it's a pleasure, man.
Oh, man, one or two things going on here. Let's get started with the big stuff. Larry's got a great website. It's a site that I go to regularly, that a lot of us in the alternative media go to regularly. I'll say this, if you want to know what's going on, if you want to kind of keep up with the latest news, there's a number of places you can go. I like consortiumnews.com and Moon of Alabama and all these other places. But one of the websites that you have to make a regular part of your internet visit is sonar21.com. And that's Larry's website. And don't forget, when you get there, you got to subscribe. And there you go. You got to become a subscriber. And of course, the old support us. PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, or Buy Me a Coffee. That's the way you get to, you can be a part of this thing, and you can help Larry and help all of us to continue on with our journey, to educate the public and to work with each other to try to make sure that we get the information out to the public that they are denied by the mainstream media. All right, Larry, here's something interesting. I'm glad you wrote this article, because what we get from, whether it's the Trump people or whoever, about a deal, a quoted deal, they always use that term, a deal. Can we get a deal? And there's a discussion like, okay, we got to talk to the Russians. What will they accept? What won't they accept? Oh, right. This is what Putin wants, as though the mood of Vladimir Putin, his emotional state on any given day. And you bring out something important here. Before the special military operation started, I think it was June 17th or 19th of 2021, the Russians released a document, and they said to NATO and the US, look, we got some issues. There's some issues in Ukraine. Here's a written list of our issues we need to talk about. We want a written response, or things could go bad here in Ukraine. And basically, NATO, the NATO chief said the Russians don't get a say in this. And the U.S. State Department, Blinken, said, this is not even a starting point. In other words, this ain't what we're trying to accomplish. How in the world are we going to tear Russia to pieces and steal all of its natural resources if we go around making deals with them? But now they pretend like that didn't happen, and I'm glad. The article at sonar21.com, NATO expansion, the root cause of the war in Ukraine. Everybody should go read this. Larry.
Well, every time the issue of a ceasefire is raised, and Russia talks about negotiations and talking to Trump, they always come back to this: we've got to address the root causes, without ever saying what those root causes are. So that's why I wrote it, because when you go back and look at that draft treaty, so they did a version that was for U.S. and Russia, and for Russia and NATO. Sorry, my dogs are barking at somebody. But when you go through that treaty, it's very clear. This was about pushing NATO back to its 1997 boundaries. And 1997 really is sort of the critical year for the start of NATO's expansion to the east, because it's in 1997 that they set up, start using a base in Western Ukraine called Yavoriv, and that becomes a de facto sub-headquarters of NATO for the next, even through to today. And it's still, the Russians just attacked it again the other day and killed some mercenaries. So this was all about NATO's expansion. And several of a couple of the items in that treaty, in that draft treaty, was one, getting mutual control over intermediate range ballistic missiles. So it was Donald Trump that walked away and trashed that agreement. It wasn't Russia. And, Russia was suggesting, hey, let's go back to this. Now, since since Biden rejected this overture from Russia as well in December of 2021, Russia has gone on to build the Oreshnik, which is a hypersonic missile. It's not ballistic, it's hypersonic, which means it travels faster than a ballistic missile, but it can be steered. So really, it's impossible to shoot down, impossible to defeat. The other issue in here was to no longer place nuclear weapons outside of the country. And we saw just in the last 2 weeks that Donald Trump has allowed nuclear weapons to be forwarded from the United States to the United Kingdom. So they're in Great Britain. And the Russians are taking note of that. The United States didn't try to hide it. And so this is an effort to try to bully or threaten the Russians. And, you don't want to get into a finger poking contest with a nuclear superpower.
What kind of were they missiles? Were they dumb bombs? What were they?
Dumb bombs, it looked like.
Okay. So basically, in a nutshell, it was a maneuver because, I mean, the regular old bombs, the idea that you're going to put them on some kind of a RAF plane and that plane's going to make it into Moscow without being shot down, it's not, feasible. But the point is, I think that you put them in there to, I don't even know what they, if it's to, it certainly doesn't scare Russia. I don't know what it is. I think it's more for an internal thing, with the intelligence and military people saying, look what we can do or something. I don't even get it.
Well, I was started doing some research last night because I was wondering when did this real deep-seated animus towards Russia and Putin start? Putin comes into power on August 9th as prime minister of 1999. And so I did a search looking at general press coverage for 2000, 2001, 2002. Those 3 years, it was pretty positive. They saw, hey, this is a guy we can work with. There were some cracks about his authoritarianism and lack of democracy, typical Western hypocrisy. But the relationship started going sour in 2003. Why? Well, we were criticizing Putin's brutality in fighting back against this Islamic insurgency that the West had backed. But then Putin had the audacity to oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And man, that did it for us. We're through with him. Now, here's the real irony. This entire period, the United States killed more civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan than Putin did in fighting the Chechen War. And yet we're the ones calling him the brutal dictator. We got so much blood on our hands, you can't bleach it out. So this was, and during this entire period, again, we continued to expand NATO. Putin asked in 2000, hey, how about Russia? Let us join NATO. No. We can't have you. Because if we got you in the club, man, we can no longer justify going to war. We need an enemy. It's just sick.
Also, when you look at this, let's go over, because most people hear this term root cause. They actually published a document that addressed the root causes. So let's talk about them. And the first thing, the very number one, because I've had people call me on my radio show in DC. Well, he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And I'm like, well, where do you get that from? And they'll start voicing these things that they heard on CNN or whatever. And when I say to them, what evidence do you have of that? I certainly have never seen that. He's never said that. He's always said the opposite. And they just start stuttering. Let's get to this root cause. What did they ask for? No NATO expansion, including a ban on military activity in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. What's interesting is that he's saying, I don't want you to expand to my border, and I don't want you to practice attacking me on my border. Larry.
Yeah. And see, so there are, I guess there are now over 31 countries in NATO, but back what we saw was, let's just go with the number 28. Of those 28 countries, and then Ukraine has hosted more military exercises than all but 6 countries that are members of NATO. Think about that. Even the NATO members haven't hosted as many military exercises. And these exercises they're designed for one thing, basically to show how Ukrainian military can work with NATO forces in attacking Russia. Now, they don't come out and say that it's Russia per se, but that's the villain. That's the enemy in this case. And so they've been doing this for 30 years. And Russia finally said, hey, we got to no, this is going to stop now. And, if Russia was conducting these kinds of exercises in Canada or Mexico, we'd be out of our mind. And we'd view it as a potential cause of war. So, the first and foremost, stop expanding to the east. This expansion, they keep talking about, as you said, that the Russians want to reconstitute the Soviet Empire. Hey, they're not the ones that have been moving and expanding their organization to the east. That's us.
Well, and if you look, I've got a map here. And here, and if you look at this map, it makes it obvious why. When you look at this map, you see that when you look at the borders of Ukraine, now they attempted a color revolution in Belarus just before a few years ago that didn't go so well. That didn't work out. But the bottom line, if you look at Western Europe and all of even Eastern Europe, right, and look at their border, Belarus and Ukraine, there's the giant border. And for Russia to take Belarus and Ukraine from them makes it almost impossible for them to attack. They got to go through the Balkans. They got to go up through Finland, which isn't a good option because you got to move stuff all the way up to Finland, and it's a big open area, easily targeted in Finland. And of course, you've got the Black Sea. If they don't have Odessa, Sevastopol, particularly if Russia takes Odessa, which I suspect they will, then you can't move in the Black Sea. Right now, you can't move in the Black Sea, but if they take Odessa, you can't, put a seagull can't fly in the Black Sea that the Russians can't shoot it and fill it full of holes within seconds. So my point being, the only reason you would want these things all of these areas would be to go after Russia, to menace Russia, to attack Russia, to put Russia on its back foot. If you're not trying to do that, and so we look at that and we say, no wonder Russia said no Ukraine. If you get Ukraine, you're all over our border.
Yeah, and they also want, they said, hey, and stop deploying your forces. Right now, we've got NATO, and you've got U.S. troops in the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, up on the north of Russia, as well as troops in Romania and troops in Poland. Now, there's no need for that because we're doing that to provoke. I always say, turn it around. If they were doing that to us, how would we react? And we don't get away with this. Yeah, but we're special or we're different. Yeah, you know how we're different? We've got the blood of more people from more countries on our hands than any other country in the world. And when you start stacking the bodies from Vietnam, from Cambodia, from Laos, from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Panama, Dominican Republic. I mean, please. At some point, we need to look in the mirror and say, we got a problem. It's not communism. It's not authoritarianism. It's us. We're the problem. Another
one of the things that the Russians brought up in their root causes document was a ban on intermediate range missiles. Both Russia and U.S. would be prohibited from deploying ground launch and shorter range missiles outside their national territories, as well as in areas of their own territory where such missiles could strike the other's territory. Here's the thing about it. When I hear this, they're not saying we want you they're saying neither country
Right.
We shouldn't be able to threaten you, and you shouldn't be able to threaten us. And the U.S. was like, nah, we should be able to threaten you, but you shouldn't be. It's well, no. In fact, I remember not long ago, some Russian or Iranian or some kind of ships came to Brazil, and Ted Cruz says we should bomb them. We should attack Brazil. We should attack them because they allowed some ships from a country we didn't like that we saw as an adversary. Now, so we should be able to go all along Russia's border. We should be able to build bases, put in missiles. And what do we say? These countries should be able to choose for themselves. Okay, Russia wants to dock a few boats in Brazil. No, we should bomb them. We should be able to do it. You should.
Yeah, no, I mean, the hypocrisy is off the charts. And this, Biden should have taken that deal because he didn't. Russia then introduced the Oreshnik missile, which is it's a multiple, it has multiple warheads, hypersonic, and you can steer them all. And it moves, when it's moving at and it speeds of excess of Mach 10, which is really fast. It's just the kinetic force it brings when it hits, apart from having an explosive warhead on it, is just it's incredibly destructive. And it was Donald Trump that walked away, that abrogated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty Agreement, INF, which had been negotiated in the 1970s, because at that time the Europeans were scared to death that the Soviets had an intermediate range ballistic missile, could hit them whenever they wanted. They needed protection. And so they got the protection with Russia saying, okay, we'll give up our intermediate range ballistic missiles. You guys do the same. So that gave right there, that exposes the lie that the Soviets then were intent on conquering Europe. Because if they're intent on conquering Europe, they go, hell no, I'm not giving up a weapon because we're going to use it against you. So now here's the irony. Donald Trump breaks that treaty. Russia now builds a weapon that none of the cities in Europe have protection against. But Russia now may hit them, because they said the other day that if any of these long range or medium range missiles like the Taurus are fired and hit Moscow or St. Petersburg, then Maria Zakharova said, okay, then your own capitals, your own cities, your own bases will be a target. We're not going to sit back and let you attack us, and then you're not going to have to pay a price. So they've been, Germany, France, England, they've been put on notice. We'll see if they listen.
Limited maneuvers. Now, the next thing, limits on heavy bombers and surface warship deployments. Both sides would restrict the operation of heavy bombers and warships in areas from which they could strike targets on the other's territory. Again, they're saying, something I remember. I recall reading somewhere that when Donald Trump first went to South Korea, and they did this exercise where they ran all these planes all the way up to the 38th parallel or whatever, ran them up to these nuclear capable, and at the last minute, they ducked away. And they were faking like they were attacking. They said, look what we can do. And basically Trump said, that's crazy, which was, he was like that. Well, what that, stop doing that, right? Which is what any reasonable person would say. Now, he's done lots of foolish things since then, but that was a good thing to do. My point being, it seems something that the U.S. does. Nobody's flying that. We're like, oh, North Korea, we better scare them. Let's do fake attacks on them. We can fly along the Black Sea and these others with these nuclear capable things like we're faking attacks. What happens if Russia looks and says, I don't think this is a fake launch? Boink. It's insane.
Yeah, we did. It happened under Donald Trump's watch in September of 2020. During one of these exercises, they allowed a B-52, at least one, and it may have been two, B-52s to fly along Ukraine's coast in the Black Sea towards Russia. I mean, it's insane. It's like, what the hell were you thinking? Because, and that's exactly what Russia's talking about. They want to, let's ratchet down, because you bring in a warship or you bring in a plane that's capable of carrying a nuke, then we have to assume from a planning standpoint that it's carrying a nuke and may have to shoot it down. The same with, that somebody talked about giving the Ukrainians a Tomahawk cruise missile. Same problem. That missile can carry a nuclear warhead. If that gets deployed in theater, they're gonna have to assume that it's carrying a nuke. And how could they not conclude that now? Because one of the other elements there was, you're not going to deploy nukes, and we just, as I mentioned earlier, we just deployed those nukes back to England. We had taken them out in the past in order to reduce tensions. Now under Trump, I'm the peace president. Nonsense. All he's doing is ratcheting up tensions.
And they called also for nuclear weapons restrictions. All nuclear weapons we confine to each other's national territory, withdrawal of all U.S. nuclear weapons from Europe, eliminating of existing infrastructure for their deployment. Again, you're looking at the kind of treaty that most of mankind would benefit from, that most of mankind would say, wow, you know what? That makes us all a little safer. And the position of the U.S. is, you got to be crazy if you think we're going to do that.
Right. Yeah. No,
a mutual security pledge. Each side would agree not to take any security measures that could undermine the course of security of interests of other parties. And let me say this, that's perfect for working on some kind of a treaty. I tell you why. Because you come up with something broad like that. We would agree not to take security measures that could undermine the core security interests of the other party. And then you sit down and you have your specialists determine what they are and write them out. This is a good, some general statements that give diplomats the opportunity to sit down with these general statements and work out a treaty. Now, if you want to come overthrow my government and steal everything in my country, man, this treaty doesn't look so hot.
Right.
And I think what it really did is expose the malevolence and the malicious nature of the policy of Washington, of the Washington neocons.
Yeah. No, this is the demands in this treaty, or let's call it the proposals, quite reasonable. If your goal is to say, okay, let's take everything, let's take every step possible to avoid going to war. But what Donald Trump is now doing is the exact opposite. Yeah, he talks a good game about wanting to be Mr. Peace President, but he thinks he can bully or threaten Putin or Xi of China into doing what Trump wants. And Trump doesn't listen. Russia said it over and over and over. The basic problem here is NATO. And so what does Trump do? Hey, let's spend NATO. Let's get NATO spending more money, and we'll be happy to sell NATO all the weapons that they can use against Russia. Well, that's not going to make Russia feel any better, because the kind of language they're hearing come out of Germany and out of the UK, it's more bombastic and belligerent than any, saying things about the Russians that they never even said about the Soviets, for God's sake.
One of the things that I think is important for people to, I'd like to get your thoughts on, and that is this discussion about a deal that discounts the Russians' position. That what this is really about. Let's get a deal, as though, and Trump has said things, well, sometimes if you got a bunch of kids in the schoolyard, you got to let them fight it out, and just different things to oversimplify this. And even the whole concept of we're going to get a deal and we need a ceasefire and things of that nature. All of that pretends that this war is something that it ain't. The whole pretense is that Russia invaded Ukraine for what? Because they didn't like Ukraine or democracy or some such bullshit. And that we need a deal there, as opposed to, it's really the other way around, that the U.S., and this is my opinion, the U.S. and Europe intend to take Russia to pieces, to split up, to steal all its natural resources and to split them up, just like they've done time and time again, to like basically rob a bank and then the criminals split up. Everybody gets a percentage of the stolen loot, and that's what they want to do to Russia. And they're trying to pretend like that ain't it. And Russia's like, guys, we kind of know what you're going to do here.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. And it'd be one thing. It wasn't just the expansion of NATO. It was the attempt to launch color revolutions, as you pointed out, in Belarus. That failed. They tried to do it in Georgia. That's failed.
Kazakhstan, remember that one?
Yep, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. So the U.S. is poking all around the edges because we see Russia as because of its vast natural resources, it can't be allowed to have those. We want them. And plus, we need to break up Russia so that it's no longer aligned with China, because the ultimate objective here is to take out China. And, again, the Western obsession with meddling in the affairs of other countries instead of staying at home and minding your own damn business is just something we can't do, because, our colonial history, the history of these Europeans that had been raping the world for 300-400 years, it's a tough habit to break. And, at the core of it is economic control. And that's what's now threatens the West from what Russia and China are doing, because they're setting up an alternative financial system that's no longer under the control of Washington or London. And that's got people spooked, including Trump.
Yeah, what's interesting, within the last few weeks, Wang Yi, I think he's the foreign minister, I believe, for China, was talking to, apparently it's been reported that he was talking to some Europeans saying, we can't allow the
Kaya Kallas.
Yes, and said we can't allow the Russians to lose. And I think that didn't mean we think the Russians are going to lose or going to need our help. I think it was a position statement to some extent, saying, look, guys, if it comes down to it, we're on Russia's side. So don't think that, you're going to somehow make a bargain with us behind Russia's back. I think that there was a statement there that wasn't, we're afraid that Russia's going to lose to Ukraine. I think it was something much bigger than that coming from China. What do you think?
Well, yeah. In fact, he went on to say, look, we understand that if you guys take out Russia, you're coming for us next. And he says, we're not going to let that happen. So they understand what the threat is. There has been an awakening in both Russia and China over the course of this special military operation, the war in Ukraine. If you go back to even in 2020, 2021, there was still sort of the hope, the belief that they could get along with the West. And we saw Putin just made a speech recently where he talked about this. He says, he said, we thought that once the ideological situation changed, once we got rid of communism, once Russia was restored to a Christian nation, a nationalist vibe, all being pro-Russian, that we'd be able to get along with the West. But he says, turns out that doesn't make any difference. In fact, the anger and the views being expressed towards Russia today are more intense, more antagonistic than at any time during the Cold War, for God's sake. And during the Cold War, we actually faced a country that was diametrically opposed to us on an ideological basis. But here's Russia. They're not out attacking other countries around the world. They're defending themselves at home, and they're attacking a country that was being groomed by NATO to be the proxy army to attack Russia. And in fact, the attack on Russia really started in 2014 when with first the attack on the Russian language and the culture, and then the actual physical attack on the people in the Donbass. So, this didn't just start in 2023. It's been long in coming.
And of course, that's when the whole economic sanctions ladder started. The sanctions elevator began. We're going to put massive sanctions on Russia, but actually, to me, all that did was it pushed Russia to say, well, we need to be able to do everything on our own. So Russia got set so that they could handle even more sanctions. So it is those sanctions and that period of time afterwards, I think they put Russia in a position to survive the sanctions now and to defend themselves.
Yeah, in fact, we are. This is very sort of Hegelian dialectics, where we are we're sowing the seeds in the West of our own destruction. And what I mean by that is, prior to 2022, you had China and Russia still willing to work within the Western financial system, to play by its rules, to use its mechanisms. And, really, while they talked about BRICS, they really had not made any substantive progress towards advancing it into something meaningful. Come 2022, and then the imposition of sanctions, these just broad blast at Russia, reflected one, ignorance on the part of the West. They didn't understand that Russia is a self-sufficient country, that it does not need to import, let's say, jet engines for commercial aircraft from Boeing, because it can make its own. It had been importing from Boeing because it was playing with the system. Hey, we just want to be part of the club. Now they realized this is not a club for us. They don't let us in. They hate us. They want to destroy us. So you know what? We need to start setting up our own network, our own structure. And so by shutting them out of SWIFT, they've now set in motion that the Chinese have come up with something called the cross-border inter-country payment system.
Oh, yeah.
And the SIPS, it's digital, doesn't cost as much as SWIFT does. To if you do a SWIFT transaction, they'll take 5-8% of your money. Very minimal cost on SIPS, and it's done instantaneously, whereas SWIFT will take 3 days. Well, now all of a sudden, the movement, it's moving away from SWIFT. It's moving into this area, and SWIFT is sort of one of the key, highways, if you will, financial highways in the Western financial system. Same thing with insurance. We sanctioned oil. You're not going to sell oil, and we're going to sanction your tankers. We won't let them get insurance. Russia goes, okay, we'll insure it. So they've set up an insurance business. We're calling them ghost ships, but these are ships that just have Russian maritime insurance on them now. Oh, that's different. Russia is setting up a gold market. They're moving out of the London bullion market. London's always been the center of this. Now all of a sudden Russia's moving out. In fact, China as well is moving. So they're moving heavily into gold, not to put a gold standard per se, but the fact that people deal with Russia or with China, they'll know that there is gold backing up the currency. So all of a sudden, the West, which thought it was the dominant economic power, is now up against BRICS. And BRICS, they account for 55% of the world population, just the 19, 20 countries that are either full members or partners. And they account for 45% of the world's GDP in terms of purchasing power parity. So we're talking about this one bloc is now actually more influential and has as much actually more economic power than the G7, which used to be all the European nations, United States with the key European nations. and Japan.
You
So
know,
it's changed, and we're going to lose out.
I think Presidents Putin and Xi are going to meet in September, I believe it is. You
Yes,
know what?
September 2nd, September 3rd.
Based on everything that's happened, in light of what's happened in Iran, in light of the deal that was made between North Korea and Russia, the information that Russia offered the same deal to Iran, a military alliance, defensive military alliance, it wouldn't surprise me if they have some announcements to make. It wouldn't surprise me. And just as a person who says, if I look at it, I'm Russian and I'm Chinese, especially if I'm China, I'm like a defensive alliance with Russia right now that says if you attack China, you attack Russia. If you attack Russia, you attack China. Right? From the perspective of Russia, NATO has to now scratch their head and say we're screwed if we touch it. From the perspective of China, you know what I mean? And because there's certain military aspects that Russia has that China doesn't have, such as those, Yasin class submarines and other things that are very, very, very powerful military items and very high military technology. But of course, China has an unfathomable industrial capacity. We're struggling with Russia's industrial capacity. That's you can't even imagine China's industrial capacity. So my point being, in fact, I was watching a thing one time. They have one factory that's fully automated, makes 1,000 missiles a day.
Mm-hmm.
And with China, that's nothing. That's just, that's probably the small factory, the warm-up factory. But my point being, I guess I'm going to say it like this, for the world, it might be a good thing, because a war between NATO and or US versus China almost certainly goes nuclear, because the US loses in about an hour. So then we all fry. In a way, maybe we'd be better off if they do this nuclear alliance, because that would make it near impossible for the US to say, okay, we're going to attack China. Oh, darn, we got to fight China and Russia. We can't beat the damn Houthis. This probably ain't a good idea.
Yeah, I know. Well, see, the reason Putin's going is this: China, I think September 3rd marks the date that China commemorates the end of World War II. And the reality is, in World War II, China and Russia combined together, they accounted for about 80% of the total fatalities from that war.
Right.
So those two countries, they paid the biggest price. So they're going to commemorate the end of it. Now, Trump said today that he may be going to China, and that he's been invited, and I think she may have invited him to attend this ceremony. So that would give Trump a chance to finally have an in-person meeting with Putin and with Xi, and maybe then Trump will come to his senses and realize, he can't bully him.
It would give them both some cover too, because if Putin just meets with Trump, or if Xi just meets with Trump, then I guarantee that the hardliners, let's face it, they have them in their countries, will push back on them.
Right.
But it gives both of them political cover if they both do it at the same time.
Yeah. And if they do come out and announce that, hey, we've signed a mutual defense pact, then here, Trump, you can have a copy.
Yeah.
That. What is interesting is this week there have been meetings between the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. So in Iran, Ali Larijani, who is sort of he's like the Steve Witkoff for Ayatollah Khomeini. He is a special advisor, very close to the supreme leader. And he went and met with Putin. So he was definitely carrying a message from the supreme leader. And, the Russians and Chinese, I think, are taking a lot of steps to reassure Iran that they've got their back. They're not going to be facing off against the West alone. And this Trump doesn't have any leverage. All he can do is threaten military action. That is, they got away with it this last time. I don't think if it touches off again, Israel's very existence would be called into question.
Well, here's the thing, Larry, on that perspective. Most people think, okay, Israel's gearing up to attack Iran again. They're gearing up to go at them again. They're building up to go at them again. Personally, I understand where people come from, and it's logical. It makes sense, but it better not be more than 12 days. Mm-hmm. They got their asses kicked in 12 days. And if 12 days took, I don't know, a high percentage of the Iranian, the U.S. defensive missile capability, 12 more days. Okay, we'll go after. What do they think they're going to do? Well, we'll go attack them again. They'll knock the crap out of us for 12 more days, and then we'll tap out again. At some point, Iran's going to say, no, we're not tapping out. You ain't going to attack us every couple months for 12 days and then get out of it. So I think it will be very difficult for the Israelis. And add this, Larry, they had about a 12-hour period where they were open, where everything was shut down, and it was a sneak attack. Now it'll be head on, and the Iranians are ready for it, and the Iranians are strengthening. We don't know how, but clearly and obviously they're strengthening their air defense and electronic warfare systems, and probably offensive, all kinds of systems. They're getting prepared for it. So they punched you in the nose last time. They're going to kick you in the groin this time.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
No, I think it is. Again, Iran is not seeking to go to war with the West. And I'm always fascinated because the West says, yeah, but they chant death to America. Well, okay, so we don't get a crowd over here together saying death to Iran. But when you listen to the rhetoric with what we're actually saying, we're not wishing Iran health, long life. We're talking, and we're the ones who have actually murdered Iranian officials, politicians, and military leaders and scientists. We have helped kill them. Iran has not done that to the United States. And so it's just, again, it's this projection. And so Iran is in a position now that it can attack. It will not attack Israel. It will only retaliate if attacked. And it is not going to launch any preemptive strikes on anyone. It is just it's really against their religion. Unlike the Zionists, the mullahs actually practice their religion and abide by it. And so they recognize that this is probably going to result in additional conflict. And Israel does not have an air defense system to prevent it, and they will be quickly exhausted. That was what was demonstrated this last time.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And as I said, the thing to keep in mind is they had a one-day jump on them. They had an element of surprise. They could damage their stuff. They took out some of their leadership. It probably took them a few days, maybe a week to completely get on their feet. But you could see that once they got their feet set, man, they were knocking the ground. Israel cannot take that kind of a missile barrage day in and day out. There's no possibility of that. Your thoughts on this business about Zelensky? There's several schools of thought. That is there a move afoot to color revolution him? Is it all a fraud? What are your thoughts on Zelensky's grip on power, shall we say?
Yeah, well, I take Cy Hirsch's latest article, at least the part about the U.S. has grown tired of Zelensky and he's on his way out. I take that as that's legit. That's solid. That shows the thinking of people at CIA and at DOD. So once they start thinking that way, it's going to happen. I don't know when, but then on top of that, you see the U.S. sending other signs that they're not really happy with Zelensky. The Trump administration rejected his nomination of Umarov, the former defense minister, to be the new Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. You're seeing other media getting links. They're getting stories from leaks in the administration about the unhappiness with Zelensky. I know that there is a criminal investigation through DOD of the corruption in Ukraine and the money that has been siphoned off. Some of it has made its way back to the United States into the accounts of prominent politicians. Many of whom are the most vocal advocates for the war in Ukraine. One has got $23 million in his account. Another one, senator, got 17 million. So, so that whole combination of things, and then these talks that took place yesterday, and nothing was achieved out of it in Istanbul. A week ago, Zelensky said, "No, we're not going. We're going to talk." And the White House said, "Oh, yes, you are. You're going. Just make it happen." And so, we take all that together, coupled with this, sort of desperate move to take the two organizations that investigate corruption in Ukraine, NABU and SAPO. They sound like something out of a video game. The RADA passed the law at Zelensky's insistence, and now basically bringing those two organizations fully under the control of Ukraine. Previously, they were seen as really tools of the CIA or Department of Defense. So this, and against all of that, then the military situation on the ground is going very badly for Ukraine. So I think Zelensky's days are numbered. I think Cy Hirsch's sources are giving him the right information. I would note Cy sources, though, are just feeding him nonsense with respect to Russian casualties. They claim that Russia has lost 2 million men. I mean, Russia started the war in 2022 with 800,000 soldiers, and then they've grown it to 1.5 million. How do they lose? I mean, there's that loss of that size of manpower loss. There's no way that could be hidden. It'd be all over social media in Russia, and it's not. So
yeah, their whole army. They lost the whole army twice, 2.5 times. It's absurd. Yeah. But if you read, because even the Nord Stream stuff that I believed was true, but they left that MI6 because good and darn well that MI6 was all over the Nord Stream operation. And in fact, I don't know if you recall this, the Russians apparently released something at some point that you might remember this, that they had hacked into Liz Truss's phone and she sent a text that said, "It's done." Remember that when it happened, but at any rate, let me ask you this. One other thing. We've got 12 minutes here. I want to get your thoughts on the Epstein thing, because anybody with a brain knows what the hell Epstein was. I knew it from the very beginning. We all knew it. Alex Costa said he's intel. We knew. Okay. But this is a problem for Trump. And Trump said, "I will release this." He can't release that. And we all know why and all that stuff. This is very damaging for Donald Trump for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. In fact, I think the latest polls show, while he's got still a pretty strong support for his immigration policies and moving illegal immigrants out of the country, he's fallen like 40 points down on the whole Epstein issue. And, it's real. People are too focused up on, release the list. Well, there is no list. What there is are case files based upon the testimony of over 200 women who claimed that they were victimized in a human trafficking scheme. And within those case files, depositions, interviews with law enforcement, there are individuals that have been identified as having been engaged with this illicit sexual activity. And instead of opening up, taking it to a grand jury and presenting the case to get indictments and then prosecuting it, the Department of Justice, both under Republicans and under Democrats, have done nothing. It's interesting that Epstein went to jail. He had his first effort to convict him in 2008, and he got this incredibly light sentence that it didn't really curtail the activities. And then there was a settlement in a civil lawsuit in 2018, which renewed the attention on this whole matter. Again, well, who was president in 2018? Oh yeah, there's Donald Trump. And so they bring Bill Barr in February of 2019, and then in July of 2019, Epstein is arrested when he comes back from overseas. And we still don't know to this day what the precipitating incident, what really triggered him to finally go after him. But they haven't gone after the individuals that have been identified, and some of them are very prominent. Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, and I think
Epstein money.
Yeah.
Didn't Epstein move money through J.P. Morgan?
Yeah. That's why J.P. Morgan had to pay a settlement of $290 million to several of the women that had been trafficked because they had facilitated a criminal activity. So Trump's refusal now to even allow the Department of Justice to run this as a real case. I mean, it is, Obama ignored it, Biden ignored it. And the reason they're ignoring it is because they also know that if they get into this, they're going to be, Bill Clinton is going to be in trouble. Bill Gates is going to be in trouble. James Comey is going to be implicated. So they're just, they're going to leave it alone. And Trump, stupidly attacked his own base over this. And, I've been watching Candace Owens just lately for the entertainment value. Man, she's hard as woodpecker lips, and she's not letting go of this. She is using it to both make fun of Trump, and look at, she was not afraid to go after Brigitte Macron and the evidence that was presented in a book in France, indicating that Brigitte was actually born a man and was engaged actually in an act of pedophilia with a young Emmanuel Macron. Because remember, supposedly a 39-year-old teacher with a 14-year-old boy. And only it turned out that this teacher was not female, it was male.
Well, when you look at this thing, and look, as you said, I didn't even think about this, but you make a good point when we say a list. Well, the odds are they didn't sit down and say, all right, a list of all of the people, and okay, right, we got it right here on a ledger. But as you said, there was case after case after case. And every case, not only would it be, okay, what was it? You could find out this was Nate of this, whoever Virginia Joffrey said on such and such a day, she was brought in a room with Garland Nixon and told this, and this happened, and Garland did this, and Garland said that, and Garland went here, and Garland had a tattoo of an anchor on his left shoulder. That's how we know it's him. And you would have evidence that this person put forward, that this is the person, that this is what they saw. But here becomes the problem. After that, if you let these names out, an obvious question arises, and that is, well, this woman, you had testimony to the FBI, and this woman said, on this date, at this time, Garland Nixon did this, and this is a crime. FBI, how'd you follow that up? The question becomes not just what happened. The question becomes, went to the FBI. And who's the FBI agent, and who made a decision to say, you got what's the word? Obvious and clear evidence that Garland Nixon robbed the bank. Video evidence. And 10 witnesses saying we saw Garland rob the bank. Whose decision was it not to charge Garland with a crime? You know what I mean? And that's the big issue, is not just who did what, which is huge, but then it totally discredits, or dare I say, exposes the FBI for the truth.
Right. And then you get these, let's say we'll start. These are allegations of illegal activity. Okay. But you go through the step. How do you corroborate it? Well, you start looking, hey, are there flight logs? Was there what evidence do we have that this person traveled to the island and was there at that time? We could pull phone records in terms of, because the cell phone, you're able to establish where somebody's actually physically located with their cell phone. So, there are a variety of things. You get other witnesses that, there were staff, there were cooks, there were pilots. So, and chauffeurs. So there's a way, you did it professionally. You build a case and you collect the evidence, and then you present that evidence to a grand jury. And then if it warrants it, they get indicted. But that's what's not happening here. Nobody wants to prosecute it. And part of the reason is it's going to expose some deep, dark secrets on both the CIA side and the Mossad side.
Well, you've got the CIA, the Mossad, and likely MI6. You've got all three of them who were involved in a child trafficking for sex for blackmail. So they're all discredited internationally forever. Their governments are discredited. Then you've got the FBI, who interviewed like a couple hundred, whatever, a lot of people, and these people gave them clear and obvious evidence of a crime, and they didn't follow it up. So you discredit the entire system. What you show is that these were criminal activities that the system actually committed, and then with malice and intent covered up.
Yeah.
And now Trump's sitting there. The truth is this: I could get mad at Trump, or I could say, he's holding the bag here. Everybody, they're focusing on Trump. The system did this. And Trump couldn't release this information if he wanted. He'd slip on a banana peel and fall over the side of the White House. If he even dreamed about doing that, it'd be over for Trump within minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, let's call it an amazing lack of curiosity. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. But the problem is, not all of Trump hasn't alienated all of his base, but speaking for myself, I know that he has alienated beyond a point of repair, and that to give him any more benefit of the doubt is, off the table. And this is it's going to be this and or the whole Russiagate thing, or one of the wars, either renewed war in Iran, between Iran and Israel, or the war in Ukraine. One of those is going to be a big story in August. I mean, we've got, I'm just waiting to see what, but the Epstein, his Epstein inferno ain't going away.
Yeah. But last thing I'll say, this whole Israel thing, I mean, people more and more in the United States and around the world are saying, what the hell? People, you're literal. I'm seeing people starve to death.
Yeah.
You're starving people to death. I'm looking at that saying, how can you claim that we're even a legitimate government anymore? This is medieval crap to say, oh, we're that, this is, 1621 or something, the dark ages. You're starving people to death and then saying, we're protecting ourselves from Hamas or something. It's absolute madness.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw that Witkoff walked out of the talks with Hamas today and says, Hamas is not going to surrender to us. So, we'll have to figure something else out, which means, the United States is going to get more heavily involved in the war.
It's insanity. Insanity. Well,
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Larry. Let me remind everybody, and this is important, where you go to find all of Larry's stuff, and that is sonar21.com. Sonar21, you can see he's got very, very important articles here, and you can keep following. Make sure you subscribe, and of course, make sure you support. You can help this endeavor as we continue to create new content. He's got PayPal, he's got PayShoot, he's got Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee. It's important to for us all to work together in alternative media to help us all keep going. Thanks a lot, Larry, and certainly appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, brother. Appreciate it. Thanks, Gar.
All right. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Follow me on all my social media stuff. And if you can do Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon or PayPal or something like that, highly appreciated. The most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. I'm out.